I'm excited to welcome you to my channel. Before I dive into my story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. My name is Jake, and I've been a fisherman for as long as I can remember. Growing up in a small town in Maine, the sea was more than just a backdrop to our lives. It was our livelihood, our playground, and in many ways, our home. My father was a fisherman, as was his father before him, and it seemed only natural that I would follow in their footsteps. But for me, fishing was never just about the catch. It was about the moments shared out on the water, the quiet dawns, the laughter of good friends, and the peace that comes with the rhythm of the waves. I was lucky to find a group of friends who shared this passion. We were more like brothers than friends, bound together by our love for the sea and the thrill of the catch. Every year, we'd set aside a week to head out to our favorite spot, a hidden cove up the coast that we discovered years ago. It was our sanctuary, a place where the world seemed to fall away, leaving just the sound of the ocean and the call of the seabirds. Those trips became a tradition, something we all looked forward to, no matter what life threw our way. But that all changed on September 11th, 2001. I'll never forget that day. The world seemed to stop as the news spread of the attacks. It was a day of loss for so many, and like countless others, I lost people I loved dearly. 3 of my closest friends, Mark, Tommy, and Steve, were in New York that day for a business trip. They were supposed to come back, supposed to meet me the next weekend for our annual fishing trip. But they never made it home. The loss was irreparable. It felt like the ocean itself had swallowed up a part of my soul, leaving behind an emptiness that nothing could fill. In the days that followed, I felt adrift, like a ship without a rudder. But as the weeks turned into months, I knew I had to do something to honor their memory, something that would keep our bond alive even if they were no longer here. And so, I decided to keep our tradition going. Every year on September 11th, I returned to our favorite fishing spot, not just to fish, but to remember. To pay tribute to the brothers who can no longer cast their lines beside me. It's a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey I make alone but never truly alone, because in those moments by the water, I can still feel them with me. September 11th started like any other day. The sun rose over the Atlantic, casting a golden light across the water, and I was up early, as usual, prepping my gear for the weekend's trip. I was looking forward to it more than ever. Mark, Tommy, and Steve had all been out of town on a business trip, and we hadn't seen each other in weeks. This trip was supposed to be our big reunion, a chance to catch up and unwind the way we always did, out on the water with rods in hand. I remember getting the first call mid-morning. My wife's voice was trembling, and I could barely make out what she was saying. Something about planes, about New York. My heart started to race as I turned on the TV. The images on the screen didn't make sense at first, smoke billowing from one of the twin towers, chaos in the streets. Then the second plane hit. The shock of it was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. But it wasn't until the news anchor mentioned the towers collapsing that the full weight of it hit me. My first thought was of Mark, Tommy, and Steve. I knew they were in New York for a big meeting, but I didn't know where. I tried calling them over and over, desperate for any sign that they were okay. But there was nothing. Just silence on the other end of the line. Hours passed, and the news kept getting worse. By afternoon, the towers were gone, reduced to rubble, and so was my hope. The waiting was the worst part. The not knowing. We all held onto some small sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, they had made it out. But as the hours turned into days, that hope started to fade. The official word came a few days later. They had been in one of the towers, in a meeting room on one of the upper floors. There was no way they could have survived. The shock of it was overwhelming. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept replaying our last conversations in my head, Tommy joking about how we were going to catch the biggest fish of our lives on this trip, Steve talking about how he needed a break from work, and Mark, always the planner, making sure we had everything ready for the weekend. And now, they were gone, just like that. It didn't seem real. The entire fishing community felt the loss. These weren't just guys I fished with, they were pillars of our small town. Everyone knew them, everyone loved them. Mark had been running his family's bait shop for years, and he was always the first to lend a hand when someone needed help. Tommy was the life of the party, the guy who could make anyone laugh, even on the worst days. And Steve, well, Steve was the quiet one, but he had a heart of gold. The kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back without a second thought. In the weeks that followed, the town came together in a way I'd never seen before. There were memorials, fundraisers, and countless moments of silence. But none of it filled the void they left behind. Our fishing trips, our traditions, our brotherhood, it was all tied to them. And without them, it felt like those things had lost their meaning. I didn't know how to move forward. For a while, I didn't even want to. The thought of going back to our favorite fishing spot without them was unbearable. But as the first anniversary of their passing approached, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let their memory fade away. So, I made a promise to myself that I would keep our tradition alive. Every year, on that day, I would go back to that spot and fish in their honor. It was the only way I could think of to keep them with me, to keep our bond alive, even if they were no longer here to share it. In the weeks following that terrible day, the idea of returning to our favorite fishing spot without Mark, Tommy, and Steve felt almost impossible. But as the first anniversary of their passing approached, I realized I couldn't just let the day go by without honoring them. They were more than just friends, they were my brothers in every way that mattered. So, I decided to start a new tradition, a pilgrimage of sorts, back to the place where we had shared some of the best moments of our lives together. That place is a secluded cove up the coast of Maine, about a 2-hour drive from where we all grew up. It's a spot we stumbled upon by chance years ago during one of our first fishing trips together. Tucked away from the main roads, you wouldn't even know it was there unless someone showed you the way. The path leading down to the cove is narrow and overgrown, winding through dense pine trees that give way to a rocky shoreline. The air is always crisp, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine, mixed with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. The cove itself is something out of a postcard, a crescent of white sand bordered by jagged rocks that jet out into the Atlantic. The water here is a deep, sapphire blue, so clear that on a calm day, you can see straight to the bottom, where crabs scuttle across the sand and schools of fish dart in and out of the rocks. When the tide is low, small tide pools form in the crevices, filled with starfish and anemones that we used to marvel at like kids. We always called it our secret spot, because it felt like it belonged to us. No one else ever seemed to come here, and that was part of its magic. It was our escape from the world, a place where we could leave our worries behind and just be ourselves. We'd spend hours out on the water, casting our lines and talking about everything under the sun, work, family, dreams, and the kind of nonsense that only best friends can share. But it wasn't just the fishing that made the spot special. It was the camaraderie. The way we'd sit around a campfire at night, cooking up the day's catch, sharing a few beers, and telling stories until the stars came out. It was the laughter that echoed off the rocks, the good-natured ribbing when someone missed a bite, and the quiet moments when we'd just sit in silence, content in each other's company. Those were the moments that bonded us, that turned 3 friends into brothers. After their passing, I couldn't bear the thought of letting that spot fall into memory. I knew I had to go back, not just to remember them, but to keep a piece of them alive. So, every year on September 11th, I make the drive up the coast. I pack my gear the same way we always did, making sure I have everything we used to bring, right down to the old tackle box that Tommy swore by. The drive is always bittersweet, filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. But as I turn down that familiar path and the trees give way to the sight of the ocean, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. When I arrive, I take a moment to stand on the rocks and look out over the water. I can almost hear their voices in the wind, feel their presence beside me as I make my way down to the shore. I set up camp the way we used to, building a fire, setting out the chairs, and placing a photo of the 3 of them on the rock we always used as a table. Then, I cast my line into the water, just like we always did. The fishing isn't really the point anymore, though I still smile every time I feel a tug on the line, imagining Tommy's grin as he'd pull in a catch. As the sun sets and the sky turns shades of pink and orange, I sit by the fire, the warmth of the flames chasing away the chill of the evening air. I talk to them sometimes, out loud, telling them about what's happened in the past year, how the family's doing, how the fishing's been. It might seem strange, but it helps. It makes me feel like they're still with me, like they're just out of sight, sitting around the fire, waiting for me to pass them another beer. This tradition has become my way of keeping their memory alive. It's not just about mourning their loss, but about celebrating the lives they lived, the bond we shared, and the countless memories we made in that little cove by the sea. It's a pilgrimage I'll make as long as I'm able, a promise I made to them and to myself, that as long as I keep coming back, a part of them will always be there, casting their lines into the deep blue waters of our secret spot. The first hints of September always bring with them a mix of emotions. The days start to cool, the leaves begin to change, and there's a familiar crispness in the air that signals the approaching anniversary. It's a time of year that I both dread and look forward to, dread because it forces me to confront the loss all over again, but look forward to because it's my chance to reconnect with my friends in the only way I know how. As the date draws nearer, I start preparing for the trip, a process that's become as much a ritual as the trip itself. I keep all my gear in a small shed out back, a place that's half workshop, half sanctuary. It's filled with the smell of old wood, salt water, and the faint scent of the bait that's been stored there over the years. The walls are lined with fishing rods, tackle boxes, and shelves crammed with all the odds and ends we've accumulated over a lifetime of fishing trips. I always start with the basics: rods, reels, tackle, and bait. Each piece has a memory attached to it. There's Mark's favorite rod, the one he swore by for catching striped bass. I make sure to pack it first, even though I never use it. It's just part of the ritual now, like bringing a piece of him along for the journey. Then there's Tommy's old tackle box, dented and worn from years of use. He never went fishing without it, even though half the lures inside were rusted or broken. I still smile when I open it up, the sight of those familiar, battered lures bringing back the sound of his laughter. Steve's gear was always the neatest, everything in its place, meticulously organized. I pack his favorite reel, a sleek, well-oiled piece of machinery that still runs as smoothly as the day he bought it. I take extra care with it, knowing how much it meant to him. I add a few of his favorite lures to my own box, ones that I know he'd use if he were still here. As I gather the gear, the memories come flooding back, our early morning drives, the way the fog would hang over the road as we headed toward the coast, the smell of coffee in the thermos, and the sound of classic rock on the radio. Packing the truck feels like slipping into an old routine, one that's as familiar as breathing. But it's also a time when the loss feels freshest, as if each item I place in the truck is another reminder of what's missing. Once the gear is ready, I move on to the more personal touches, the rituals that have become a part of this pilgrimage. I go into the house and pull out a small, weathered box from the back of a closet. Inside are a few precious items I bring with me every year, photos, letters, and a few mementos that belong to the guys. There's a picture of the four of us from our last trip together, all grinning like fools with a stringer full of fish. I place it carefully in my bag, making sure it's wrapped up tight so it doesn't get damaged. Next, I grab the small wooden plaques I had made after they passed. Each one is engraved with their names and a short message, just a few words that capture the essence of who they were. Mark, the planner; Tommy, the joker; Steve, the heart. I tie them up with some twine and place them in the front seat of the truck. These plaques have been with me on every trip since they were gone, and when I get to the cove, I set them up on the rocks overlooking the water, a small memorial that stays with me throughout the trip. Finally, I prepare the cooler. This was always Tommy's job, and he took it seriously. Even though it's just me now, I make sure to pack it just like he would: plenty of ice, a few sandwiches, and, of course, the beers we all liked. I grab a 6-pack of the same brand we always drank, even though I know I'll only have 1 or 2. The rest will sit by the fire, a silent toast to the friends who aren't there to enjoy them. As I finish packing, the weight of the trip starts to settle in. It's a heavy feeling, a mix of anticipation and sorrow. But there's also a sense of purpose, a determination to honor the promise I made to myself and to them. The trip isn't just about remembering, it's about keeping the tradition alive, about making sure that their spirit lives on in the place we all loved so much. Before I head out, I take a moment to stand in the driveway, looking at the packed truck. Everything is ready, just like it always was. But I'm not. I never am. That's the hardest part, knowing that no matter how many times I make this trip, it will never feel the same. But I owe it to them, to the memories we made, to keep going. To keep fishing. To keep remembering. So, I take a deep breath, climb into the driver's seat, and start the engine. The road ahead is long, but it's a road I'm willing to travel, year after year, as long as I can. The road leading out of town is one I know by heart, every twist and turn, every bump and dip. It's the same road we've driven countless times, heading north along the coast toward our secret spot. But no matter how familiar it is, each year the drive feels a little different, emptier, lonelier, and heavier with the weight of memories. As I pull out of my driveway, the sun is just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow across the horizon. The early morning mist clings to the fields, and the air is crisp, with that unmistakable hint of autumn. I crack the window, letting in the cool breeze that carries the faint scent of salt from the ocean just a few miles away. The old truck rumbles beneath me, the engine's steady hum a comforting sound in the quiet of the morning. The first part of the drive takes me through the town where we all grew up. It's small and unassuming, with a main street lined with mom-and-pop shops, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. As I pass by the old bait shop where Mark used to work, I can almost see him standing behind the counter, chatting with customers and offering tips on the best spots to fish. A pang of sadness hits me, but I push it down, focusing on the road ahead. Once I'm out of town, the road winds through the pine forests that stretch along the coast. The trees are tall and dense, their dark green needles a stark contrast to the golden light filtering through the branches. I can hear the crunch of gravel under the tires as I drive, the occasional bird call breaking the silence. This part of the journey is always the most peaceful, just me, the road, and the anticipation of what lies ahead. But as I drive, my mind inevitably drifts to the past. I think about how different this trip used to be, how full of life and laughter. Back then, the truck was packed to the brim with gear, coolers, and our voices, all talking over each other as we planned out the weekend. Mark would be in the passenger seat, studying a map or double-checking our supplies, while Tommy and Steve would be in the back, already joking around and making plans for the first cast. The truck was always alive with their presence, with the energy that only comes from a group of friends who know each other better than anyone else. Now, the truck is quiet, save for the low murmur of the radio playing softly in the background. The seat next to me is empty, and the only voices are the ones in my head, echoes of conversations long past. I can't help but notice how the drive feels longer now, the miles stretching out before me as if to remind me of how far I've come along. As I near the coast, the landscape begins to change. The trees thin out, giving way to rocky cliffs and glimpses of the ocean beyond. The sight of the sea, endless and blue, always brings a sense of calm. It's as if the vastness of it helps to put things into perspective, reminding me that while the world keeps moving, some things remain constant, like the pull of the ocean and the memories tied to this place. The final stretch of the drive takes me down a narrow, winding road that leads to the cove. This road is rough and uneven, more of a path than a proper road, and the truck jostles and bumps along as I navigate the turns. The closer I get, the more my heart starts to pound, a mix of anticipation and melancholy. I know what's waiting at the end of this road, both the peace of the familiar and the ache of what's missing. When I finally reach the cove, I pull the truck to a stop at the edge of the trees. I take a moment to just sit there, engine off, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks in the distance. The cove is hidden from view, but I can feel its presence, like a long-lost friend waiting patiently for my return. As I step out of the truck and breathe in the salty air, I'm hit with a wave of emotions, grief, yes, but also a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the years we had together, for the memories we made, and for this place that still holds a piece of them. The trip has changed so much over the years, from a lively weekend with friends to a solitary pilgrimage, but the heart of it remains the same. I grab my gear from the back of the truck, sling the old tackle box over my shoulder, and start down the familiar path to the cove. Each step brings me closer to the place that has become both a refuge and a reminder of what I've lost. As I walk, I can almost hear their voices carried on the wind, guiding me back to the spot where we were always happiest, together, out on the water, with the world at our feet. Approaching the cove, the sight of the ocean stretching out before me is like coming home. The memories are as vivid as the day we first found this place, and though I'm alone, I know that in some way, they're still here with me. This is where we belong, where our bond was forged and where it continues, year after year, as long as I keep coming back. The moment I step into the clearing, I'm hit with a flood of memories. The cove stretches out before me, exactly as I remember it, a hidden sanctuary tucked away from the world. The sun is still low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the water, making it shimmer like liquid glass. The waves lap gently against the shore, the sound familiar and comforting, like an old friend welcoming me back. I take a deep breath, savoring the salt in the air, and let my eyes wander over the landscape. The jagged rocks that frame the cove are as rugged as ever, their edges softened by years of sea spray and wind. The beach is a perfect crescent of sand, untouched and pristine, with only the occasional piece of driftwood scattered along the shore. In the distance, seagulls circle lazily, their calls echoing through the stillness. As I walk toward our usual camping spot, I can't help but smile at the memories that surface with each step. This was where we always set up camp, a little nook sheltered by a cluster of rocks that provided just enough protection from the wind. I can still see Mark fussing over the tent, making sure it was pitched just right, while Tommy and Steve argued good-naturedly over who would start the fire. I was usually the one gathering wood, laughing at their banter as I lugged armfuls of driftwood back to the camp. I set down my gear and begin the familiar routine, starting with the tent. It's the same one we used on all our trips, a sturdy, weathered thing that's seen its share of storms and sunshine. As I unroll it, I can almost hear Mark's voice in my head, reminding me to check the seams, to make sure it's anchored securely. I take my time setting it up, making sure everything is just as it should be, as if he's standing over my shoulder, supervising. Next, I gather some driftwood and kindling for the fire. The beach is scattered with pieces of sun-bleached wood, perfect for building a small, steady flame. As I stack the wood, I remember all the nights we spent around the fire, the flickering light casting long shadows as we told stories, shared jokes, and relived old memories. It was around that fire that we were most ourselves, the world falling away until it was just us and the crackling flames. Once the fire is lit, I take out the small wooden plaques I brought with me, the ones I made for each of them after they were gone. I placed them on the rock we always used as a table, arranging them carefully so they face the water. It's a small gesture, but it feels right. A way to include them in the trip, to acknowledge their presence even though they're not physically here. As I look at their names etched into the wood, a wave of sadness washes over me, but it's mixed with something else, gratitude. Gratitude for the time we had, for the memories we made, and for this place that still feels like it belongs to all of us. With the camp set up, I finally allow myself to sit down and take it all in. The cove is quiet, the only sounds the gentle murmur of the waves and the occasional cry of a distant seagull. The sun is climbing higher now, warming the air, but there's still a coolness to the breeze that reminds me of how far north we are, how close to the edge of the world this place feels. I sit by the fire, watching the smoke curl up into the sky, and let my mind wander. It's in these quiet moments that I feel them most, Mark, Tommy, and Steve. It's as if they're just out of sight, sitting around the fire with me, their voices carried on the wind, their laughter echoing in the rustle of the leaves. I talk to them sometimes, out loud, knowing that it's more for me than for them, but it helps. It makes the silence less heavy, the absence less profound. As I sit there, I remember specific moments from our past trips. The time Tommy caught a fish so big he nearly toppled over trying to reel it in, the rest of us laughing so hard we could barely stand. Or the night we stayed up until dawn, watching the stars fade into the morning light, talking about everything and nothing, content just to be there together. Those memories are as vivid as the day they happened, preserved in the salty air and the crash of the waves. But there are also the smaller moments, the ones that don't make for great stories but mean just as much, the way Mark would always hand out cups of coffee first thing in the morning, or how Steve would quietly mend any gear that needed fixing without saying a word. Those were the moments that defined our friendship, the little acts of kindness and camaraderie that made our bond so strong. As the day goes on, I feel their presence in everything I do, in the way I cast my line into the water, in the way I tend the fire, in the way I sit quietly and watch the tide come in. They may be gone, but they're never really far away, not here, in this place that holds so much of who we were. The cove has a way of holding onto memories, of keeping them alive in the air and the earth and the sea. And as long as I keep coming back, I know those memories will never fade. This is where we made our mark, where our friendship was forged, and where it endures, year after year, as long as I'm able to make the journey. The rhythm of fishing is something that has always brought me a sense of peace, a kind of meditation that only the sea can provide. As I walk down to the water's edge, the sun climbing higher in the sky, I'm struck by the familiar feeling of solitude that comes with casting a line into the deep blue. But it's a solitude that's comforting, not lonely, a quiet space where I can connect with the memories of my friends, where I can feel their presence in the pull of the tide and the whisper of the wind. I stand there for a moment, taking it all in, the smell of salt in the air, the sound of the waves lapping against the rocks, the way the light dances on the surface of the water. Then I reach for Mark's old rod, the one he always used, and give it a once-over, checking the line, adjusting the reel. It's an old habit, something he taught me, to always make sure your gear is in order before you start. Even now, years later, I can hear his voice in my head, reminding me of the little things that make all the difference. With the rod in hand, I wade out a little, just far enough so the water laps at my boots. The first cast is always the most important, Mark used to say, setting the tone for the day. I draw the rod back, feeling the tension in the line, and then let it fly, the lure sailing out over the water before landing with a soft splash. The ripples spread out in concentric circles, and for a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. There's something almost sacred about this part of the day, the act of casting a line into the sea. It's a connection to the past, to the countless times we stood in this very spot, rods in hand, waiting for that first bite. I remember how we'd line up along the shore, each of us taking our place, the silence only broken by the occasional murmur of conversation or the rustle of the wind through the trees. Tommy was always the first to break the silence, usually with some wisecrack that had us all laughing. He had a way of making even the quiet moments feel full of life, his energy infectious. I can still see him, grinning from ears to ear as he reeled in a catch, his eyes alight with that boyish excitement that never seemed to fade, no matter how many fish he caught. Steve was the opposite, calm, focused, always patient. He could sit for hours, perfectly content to wait for the fish to come to him. We used to tease him about it, calling him the Zen master of fishing, but truth be told, we all admired his quiet persistence. He had a way of making everything seem effortless, his movements deliberate and precise. It was something I always tried to emulate, especially now, in his absence. As I stand there, rod in hand, the memories come flooding back. I remember the day we all decided to have a little competition, who could catch the biggest fish before noon. It was supposed to be all in good fun, but as the hours ticked by, the stakes seemed to get higher. By the time the sun was overhead, we were all a little too invested, the friendly banter giving way to serious determination. Tommy was the first to hook something big. We all gathered around, cheering him on as he struggled to reel it in. The fight went on for what felt like forever, the fish darting this way and that, pulling with a strength that belied its size. When Tommy finally hauled it out of the water, a massive striped bass, the look of triumph on his face was priceless. We couldn't stop laughing as he held it up for us to see, his chest puffed out with pride. But then, just as we were about to declare him the winner, Steve's rod bent nearly in half. What followed was a battle of wills between man and fish that none of us had ever seen before. Steve never lost his cool, even as the fish dragged him almost knee-deep into the water. When he finally brought it in, a beautiful bluefish, nearly as big as Tommy's bass, the only sound was the collective intake of breath. We all knew then and there that Steve had won, but in typical Steve fashion, he just gave us that quiet smile of his and said, "Guess I got lucky." Those moments, those simple, joyful moments, are what I hold on to now. They're what keep me coming back, year after year, even though the laughter and the voices are just echoes in my mind. Fishing has become more than just a pastime. It's a way to connect with their spirits, to feel like they're still here with me, casting their lines into the same waters, sharing in the same experience. As the hours pass, I lose myself in the rhythm of casting and reeling, the steady pull of the tide, the gentle tug of the line as it drifts in the current. There are no distractions out here, no noise, just the sound of the ocean and the occasional cry of a seagull overhead. It's in this solitude that I find peace, a sense of closeness to my friends that I can't find anywhere else. Even when the fish aren't biting, I don't mind. It's not really about the catch anymore, though I still get a thrill every time I feel that tug on the line. It's about the connection, the feeling that, in some small way, I'm keeping the tradition alive, that I'm honoring their memory by doing what we loved most. As the sun starts to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the water, I reel in my line one last time. I take a moment to stand there, the rod resting on my shoulder, and look out over the sea. I can almost see them, standing beside me, their silhouettes framed against the fading light. And in that moment, I feel a deep sense of contentment, knowing that as long as I keep coming back to this spot, they'll always be with me, laughing, fishing, and sharing in the joy of the sea. The day had been so peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of tranquility that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. I was lost in the rhythm of the fishing, casting, and reeling, my thoughts drifting between memories of my friends and the present moment. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, and I was starting to think about heading back to camp, maybe getting a fire going for dinner. That's when I felt it, a sudden, sharp tug on the line. It was strong, stronger than anything I'd felt in a long time. My heart leaped into my throat as I tightened my grip on the rod, bracing myself against the pull. The line went taut, humming with tension, and I knew I had something big on the other end. For a split second, excitement surged through me, the thrill of the catch, the kind of adrenaline rush that we all lived for. But just as quickly, that excitement was tempered by something else, something deeper. This wasn't just any fish, it felt like more than that, like it carried some sort of weight, an unspoken significance. It was as if the sea itself was testing me, challenging me in a way that went beyond the usual struggle between fisherman and fish. I planted my feet firmly in the sand, leaning back as the fish pulled hard, trying to drag me closer to the water's edge. The rod bent nearly in half, the reel spinning furiously as the line stretched out into the deep. My arms burned with the effort, muscles straining as I fought to gain control, to bring whatever it was closer to shore. The waves crashed against my legs, cold and insistent, urging me forward. But I held my ground, digging my heels into the sand, determined not to lose this fight. The fish was powerful, its movement strong and deliberate, and it took every ounce of strength I had to keep the line from snapping. I could feel the tension in the air, as if the world had narrowed down to just this moment, just this battle between me and the unseen force at the end of the line. As I struggled, flashes of memory came unbidden, Tommy's triumphant shout as he landed his biggest catch, Steve's calm focus as he patiently waited out a stubborn fish, Mark's steady hand guiding the reel. I could almost hear their voices, feel their presence beside me, urging me on. This was the kind of challenge they would have loved, the kind of moment that would have had us all cheering and shouting encouragement. But instead of their laughter, there was only the sound of the waves and the wind, the absence of their voices a stark reminder of how much had changed. The fish fought harder, pulling me forward a few steps, but I managed to reel it in closer, inch by inch. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts as I willed myself to keep going, to see this through. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity as the struggle continued, the fish refusing to give in, testing my resolve. And then, just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the line slackened, and I felt a surge of hope. I reeled in faster, the tension easing as the fish tired, its resistance weakening. Slowly, it came into view, a flash of silver beneath the surface, a massive shape cutting through the water. It was a striped bass, the biggest I'd ever seen. Its scales gleamed in the fading light, and as I finally pulled it ashore, I couldn't help but be awed by its size and power. But there was something else too, something that tugged at my heart as I looked down at the fish thrashing in the shallow water. This wasn't just a catch, it was a reminder, a symbol of everything we had shared, everything I had lost. I knelt beside the fish, my hand shaking as I reached out to unhook it. The fight was over, but the emotions that welled up inside me were overwhelming. I thought of all the times we'd been here together, the joy and camaraderie we had shared, and how different it felt now, standing here alone with only the echo of those memories. As I worked to free the hook, a voice called out from behind me, startling me out of my thoughts. I turned, half expecting to see a ghost, but instead, there was a man standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. He was older, with withered skin and a kind expression, his eyes full of something like recognition. "Need a hand with that?" he asked, stepping closer. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, thanks." He joined me by the water, helping me unhook the fish and steady it as it calmed down. There was something familiar about him, something that nagged at the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite place it. "You fish here often?" he asked as we worked together, his voice calm and steady. "Every year," I replied, glancing up at him. "Been coming here for years. Used to come with my friends." The man nodded, as if he understood. I figured. I used to know some guys who fished here, Mark, Tommy, and Steve. We crossed paths a few times, shared some good stories. My breath caught in my throat at the sound of their names, spoken aloud by a stranger who somehow wasn't a stranger at all. "You knew them?" "Yeah," he said, a wistful smile on his lips. "Good men, all of them. We had some great times out here. I'm sorry for your loss." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as if the world had gone still again, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that he was someone who had known them, who had shared in some of the same memories, the same experiences. It was like finding a connection I didn't know I was missing, a link to the past that I had thought was lost forever. "Thank you," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know anyone else came here. It's good to meet someone who knew them." The man nodded again, his gaze drifting out over the water. "This place has a way of bringing people together, even when they're gone. You keep coming back, and they'll always be with you. That's how it works." We stood there in silence for a few moments, the shared understanding between us needing no words. When the fish was finally free, I watched as it swam back into the depths, disappearing beneath the surface. The struggle was over, but the connection I felt in that moment was stronger than ever. As the man turned to leave, he gave me a nod, a simple gesture that held so much meaning. "Take care," he said, before walking back into the trees, leaving me alone once more by the water. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. The encounter, the struggle with the fish, the memories that had resurfaced, it was as if the cove had given me a gift, a reminder that my friends weren't truly gone. They were still here, in the stories, in the memories, in the very air that I breathed. As I packed up my gear and headed back to camp, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a calm that had been absent for a long time. The unexpected event had shaken me, but it had also brought me closer to them, to the past, and to the realization that as long as I kept coming back, they would always be with me. As I stood there by the shore, watching the stranger disappear into the trees, the weight of what had just happened settled over me like a heavy fog. The encounter had been unexpected, a sudden break in the solitude that had defined this trip for so many years. But instead of unsettling me, it brought a strange sense of clarity, as if the universe had conspired to remind me that I wasn't as alone as I had thought. The challenge I had faced with the big catch, the sheer force of that fish, the intensity of the battle, had tested me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't just about the fish, it was about what it represented. It was as if the sea had reached out and grabbed hold of me, forcing me to confront the pain, the loss, and the lingering grief that I carried with me every time I returned to this spot. I made my way back to camp, the sun now dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. The air was cooler, the wind picking up as it often did in the evening, bringing with it the scent of the ocean and the promise of a chilly night. I could feel the exhaustion in my muscles, the burn in my arms from the struggle with the fish, but there was something else too, a deep, abiding sense of connection, of strength that I hadn't realized I still possessed. As I reached the campfire, now just a few glowing embers, I thought about Mark, Tommy, and Steve. I could see their faces in my mind, clear as day, each of them offering something different, Mark's steady calm, Tommy's infectious enthusiasm, Steve's quiet resolve. These weren't just memories, they were lessons, pieces of them that I carried with me, even now. Mark was the planner, the one who always thought ahead, who kept us grounded when things got tough. I remembered the time we were caught in a sudden storm, the sky turning dark in a matter of minutes, the wind whipping up waves that threatened to swamp our boat. It was Mark who kept his cool, who calmly directed us to shore, navigating through the rough seas with a steady hand. He didn't panic, didn't let the fear take over, and because of that, neither did we. I channeled that calm now, letting it settle over me as I stoked the fire back to life, preparing for the night ahead. Tommy was the heart of the group, the one who could find joy in any situation, who kept our spirits up when things looked bleak. I thought of the countless times he made us laugh, even when the fish weren't biting or when the weather turned sour. He had a way of reminding us why we were out there in the first place, because we loved it, because we loved each other's company. His laughter echoed in my mind as I cooked a simple meal over the fire, his voice urging me to find the good in this moment, to appreciate the beauty of the cove and the quiet peace that came with it. Steve was the quiet strength, the one who never said much but was always there when you needed him. I remembered a time when my reel had jammed just as I hooked a big fish, the line threatening to snap. I had been ready to give up, but Steve had stepped in, his hand steady as he worked the reel, his calm presence reassuring me that we could land the catch together. It was that same quiet strength that I drew on now, sitting by the fire, letting the warmth seep into my bones as the night closed in around me. The challenges of the day, the struggle with the fish, the unexpected encounter with the stranger, they all felt like tests, like the cove was asking me to prove that I was still worthy of this place, still connected to the friends who had made it so special. And in a way, I felt like I had passed. Not because I had landed the fish or because I had faced the challenge alone, but because I had done it with them, with the memory of their strength and their guidance. As the fire crackled and popped, I looked out over the water, now dark and calm under the starlit sky. The wind had died down, leaving only the sound of the waves and the occasional call of a distant seabird. I could feel their presence all around me, in the rustle of the leaves, in the steady rhythm of the sea, in the warmth of the fire. I reached for one of the beers I had packed, the same kind we always drank on these trips, and popped the top. I raised it to the sky, a quiet toast to the friends who were no longer here in body, but who were still with me in spirit. To Mark, Tommy, and Steve, I said aloud, the words carrying softly on the night air. Thanks for sticking with me. I took a long drink, savoring the taste, the way it brought back memories of shared laughter and stories told around the fire. The beer was cold, refreshing, a reminder that some traditions never change, no matter how much time passes. As I sat there, the fire glowing warmly, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling that had been elusive for so long. The challenges of the day had brought me closer to them and reminded me that I wasn't alone in this journey, that I still had the strength and the memories to guide me through. This place, this cove, was more than just a fishing spot. It was a living testament to our friendship, to the bonds we had forged, and to the love that still lingered in the air. The night stretched on, the stars twinkling overhead like tiny beacons, and I knew that as long as I kept coming back, as long as I faced the challenges with their memory in my heart, I would never truly be alone. This place, this tradition, would keep us connected, no matter how many years passed, no matter how far away they seemed. And as the fire burned down to embers, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the sounds of the cove lull me into a deep, peaceful sleep, knowing that I had faced the challenges of the day with the strength and guidance of my lost friends, and that they would always be with me, guiding me through the darkest of nights. The night passed quietly, the fire's last embers dying as the stars wheeled above. When I woke at dawn, the world was bathed in the soft, golden light of early morning, the sky a canvas of pastel colors reflected on the calm surface of the cove. There was a stillness in the air, a kind of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time, and I knew that this was the right moment to reflect on the journey I had made, both this year and in all the years since I first began coming back to this place alone. I brewed a pot of coffee over the last few coals, the familiar smell mingling with the fresh scent of salt and pine. I took my cup down to the water's edge, where the waves gently lapped at the shore, and sat on the sand with my feet just touching the cool water. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and endless, a reminder of how small we are in the grand scheme of things, and yet how meaningful our connections can be. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, not just this year's trip, but all the years before it, when the four of us would make this trek together. I thought about how those trips had been filled with laughter, camaraderie, and the simple joy of being out on the water, doing what we loved. Those were the best days of my life, days when everything felt right in the world because I was with my best friends, my brothers. But then, the world changed. We lost so much on that terrible day, more than just the lives of Mark, Tommy, and Steve. We lost the future we had imagined together, the trips we'd planned, the memories we never got to make. In the aftermath, I had felt adrift, like a boat without an anchor, unsure of how to move forward without them. That's why this place had become so important to me. Returning here each year had started as a way to honor their memory, to keep a piece of them alive in the tradition we had shared. But over time, it had become something more, a way to heal, to come to terms with the loss, and to find peace in the knowledge that while they were gone, they were never truly lost. Each trip was a reminder that our bond was unbreakable, that the memories we made here would always be with me, as long as I kept coming back. The challenges of this year's trip, the struggle with that fish, the unexpected encounter with the man who had known them, had tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But they had also shown me something important, that I'm not alone in carrying their memory, that there are others out there who remember them, who were touched by their lives. It was a comforting thought, to know that their legacy lived on, not just in me, but in the hearts of others. I thought about what I had learned this year, that strength isn't just about facing challenges head-on, but about drawing on the love and support of those who have come before us. It's about remembering that we don't have to carry our burdens alone, that we can find solace in the memories of those we've lost, and in the connections that still exist, even when we least expect them. As I sat there, the sun climbing higher in the sky, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the years we had together, for the memories that had sustained me, and for this place, which had become a sanctuary where I could connect with them, year after year. I realized that this annual trip had become more than just a tradition. It was a way to keep their spirit alive, to honor the love and friendship we shared, and to find my own path forward in the process. I finished my coffee and stood up, feeling the sand shift beneath my feet. I looked out over the water one last time, the cove as beautiful and serene as ever, and felt their presence all around me. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but it was there, in the air, in the gentle waves, in the way the light danced on the water. "I'll keep coming back," I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "As long as I'm able, I'll be here. For you. For us." With that, I turned and walked back to camp, my heart lighter than it had been in a long time. I packed up my gear, carefully stowing the rods, the tackle, and the few mementos I always brought with me. As I did, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to continuing this tradition for as long as I could. It wasn't just about remembering them, it was about keeping the connection alive, about honoring the bond that had brought us together in the first place. As I loaded the last of the gear into the truck and took one final look at the cove, I felt a quiet but powerful acknowledgement of their presence, a reassurance that they would always be with me, as long as I kept coming back. The road ahead was long, and the journey was far from over, but I knew that I would never be alone on this path. They were with me, guiding me, just as they always had, and always would. With the engine rumbling beneath me, I started the drive home, the cove fading into the distance behind me. But I knew that it would never truly fade, not in my heart. As long as I returned each year, The memories would remain as vivid as the day they were made, a testament to the love, the friendship, and the bond that would never be broken. And so, I drove on, the road stretching out before me, the sun shining brightly overhead, and the promise of another trip, another memory, waiting just beyond the horizon. This is where the story ends. Share your opinion in the comments. Did you like the story?